Okay, hey team. We are trying. We're making do this morning. So I'm obviously not filming from my studio. I'm filming from the weird room off my kitchen. Why is this, you ask? Why am I not using my normal setup? A, uh, the highs this entire week are in the hundreds. So me and my pregnant butt are staying well inside the fully air conditioned space. My office has like a vent, but it's not. So when the AC in the house turns on, cold air goes in there, and that feels good. But it's not like part of the whole system. You know what I mean? Like it's not regulated at the by the thermostat. There we go. Thermostat only cares about the inside. Also, second reason I'm filming from inside today, because it is like not even 8 o'clock in the morning. I could probably be out in my office right now. I don't know if you can hear it, but we have our roof is getting replaced today, and the dogs are kind of panicking. So I'm gonna. They need me to be very close by, and they can't come into my office. It's a chaotic mess, and adding net 175 pounds of dog into a chaotic mess is never a good thing. So also, I figured maybe using just my headphone mic. I know the audio isn't as good, but like I figured this probably wouldn't pick up the roofers as much. So that's the goal. Um, but guys, I might actually be releasing a somewhat topical video. So that's exciting. Because I want to talk about the James Webb telescope. It's so cool. It's so cool, you guys. Have you seen the pictures? Maybe editing Maddie will remember to put up some of the really cool photos. But it's such a cool telescope. Oh my gosh, I'm such a nerd. I remember when I was an undergrad, I got to spend a summer interning at NASA Goddard in Maryland, and there was like work being done on the James Webb telescope, and that was like 10 years ago. And so I'm like, oh gosh, I saw some of this like before it went into space, and so that's really cool. Uh, yeah, okay. So for a little background on myself, for why I can talk about this. Oh, sorry, guys, this is the article we're going to review. My goodness, we're going to review this. This is what we're reviewing. AIG's Answers and Genesises. It's like that little girl trying to say rhinoceroses in the Christmas song. Anyway, a biblical response to the James Webb Space Telescope, which I don't know why that's so funny. But to me, but that just feels like, does that feel like magnetic poetry to you? Like YEC magnetic poetry? It definitely does to me. Because what in the world does what does the Bible have to say about a space telescope? You know what I mean? So that's the article we're going to review. And I'm talking about space stuff today. So let me just briefly go over like my credentials and why I feel uh, fairly qualified to kind of touch on this. So I'm not like an astrophysicist or a planetary scientist. That's not what I do professionally. I'm working on my PhD right now. I'm all but dissertation, just this whole pregnancy, and I'm 8 months pregnant now. So um, uh, that's going to slow down my dissertation a little bit, probably add an extra semester. Um, but my PhD is going to be in meteorology. That's what my master's is in. And so, like, oh my goodness, team, weather, climate stuff. I'm your girl. I can talk about that all day long. But why do I get to talk about space with some degree of confidence? Great question. Um, so my bachelor's degree is in math and Earth, atmospheric, and planetary sciences. So I actually didn't get into meteorology beyond like one lab class in undergrad called Weather and Climate Lab. That was actually a really fun class. I didn't get into meteorology until graduate school. I did planetary science. That was what my undergraduate research was in. My math degree, I did like physical applied mathematics. That was like a lot of fluid dynamics and stuff like that. But then, like my double major, I focused on planetary science, and so so I have a solid background in space stuff, and I feel pretty confident in my ability to speak to that. No, now it's not my field, right? But I do have a more than average background knowledge in it. So I'm not up to date on like the latest and greatest theories in astrophysics and planetary science. Um, but if we want to chat about the basics, like I'm your girl, I can help. I can help you out. So anyway, um, I realize I have been like forgetting to like state my credentials in at the front of videos, and some of y'all are new. The channel's consistently growing, which is happy. That being said, hey, YouTuber stuff, right? Like, subscribe. Um, if you are like desire to and are able to and want to financially support the channel, you can do a super thanks, which is like a super chat, but down in the comment section. Or there's a link to my Buy Me a Coffee fund in the description. But as always, just watching the video, sharing it out, that helps immensely. Um, I have very reasonable goals for the channel for this year, and we are on our way to meeting them. So I'm happy with that. But always please like share out. Love to see consistent growth. That's really happy. Okay, blah blah blah. Let's get to the fun bit. Let's talk about a biblical response to the James Webb Space Telescope. So I'll make myself small so you guys can see this. Now, this article comes from a while ago. So this was back when the telescope launched. They don't have anything new since some of the images have been coming back. But so this is from about 6 months ago. Yeah, from January 8th, 2022. Okay, so we're starting off with a psalm. So that's lovely. Um, I love this subtitle. The expected benefits from the new NASA telescope. That's fine. This is fine. We can talk about this. The naturalistic assumptions integrated into its mission. Oh goodness, what do you mean by that? We're back to magnetic poetry. And the only way to make sense of scientific investigation. God. I disagree with this statement. The only way to make sense of scientific investigation, right? I disagree with the statement because, hey, you know what I was doing yesterday? I was, I was running some code. My computer has been working a lot harder than I have on dissertation stuff recently. But I was taking climate data output and interpolating um, potential temperature and winds onto a constant potential vorticity field. And I want to do that so that I can track a specific type of upper level cyclone that happens in the Arctic called a tropopause polar vortex. I didn't have to consult my Bible once. And that sounds, I don't mean to sound super snarky, but like, um, there's no assumptions regarding the existence of a God that goes into my research, right? Like, turns out it's not a thing that comes up, you know? Um, so I'm doing quite a bit of scientific investigation that makes quite a bit of sense. And, just haven't needed to chat with God about it even once. So there's that. Okay, sorry. I need to have, yes, this is coffee. Yes, it's okay for pregnant people to have some coffee. I'm very careful about how much caffeine I drink. Anyway, I should probably have a little bit more so my brain wakes up. Okay. So the first part of this article, I read ahead a little bit. I kind of scanned it just to make sure this would be interesting to go over with you guys. This is all talking about basic facts away from about the telescope. And there's nothing wrong with this bit. But so they give a pretty good description of the telescope, its history, challenges with its launch, some of the cool features about it. But now we're going to get to this bit, the evolutionary goals behind the James Webb Space Telescope. So, and we're going to hit an oldie but a goodie here, observational as opposed to historical science, which, if you're unfamiliar, only young Earth creationists make a distinction between these two. Like, this is not, science is just science. Like, it's not like gathering observations or interpolating, like doing data analysis, drawing conclusions, right? These are all, it's all the same thing. It's all the same methodology. But young Earth creationists like to try to distinguish, no, there's observational science and that's all good and fine and lovely. But historical science, ooh, you got to be very careful with that, which is silly. Okay. So he's saying, like, if they're going to do some great observational science and this fun little mantra, observable, testable, repeatable, all science has to be observable, testable, and repeatable, right? All science has to be that to this mission, such as observing and studying the farthest regions of the visible universe that were previously hidden to us. That's going to be great. However, as seen from the many news reports published by the media, especially from NASA, yes, NASA, a known media outlet. Sorry, can you also see the hyper-conservative buzzwords here? News reports published by the media, right? Like building that like distrust, because there's that's kind of a buzzword there. The overall objectives of the telescope are saturated in evolutionary and really naturalistic thinking. Explain to me why it's a telescope, right? looks at things. Um, For example, NASA states on one of their websites, the primary goals of Webb are to study galaxy, star, and planet formation in the universe. To see the very first stars and galaxies that formed in the universe, in the early universe, we have to look deep into space to look back in time. Um, and I'm assuming I don't know if these parentheses, I would assume these parentheses are added by the author here, but then he should have ended the quotation over there. I don't, there's grammar off in this too, but we'll leave that alone because it takes light time to travel from there to here. The further out we look, the further we look back in time. So that's true, right? So yeah, so we know from previous use of telescopes, right, that if we look at different places, we see galaxies and stars and solar systems in different stages of their lifetimes. We can see stars dying, we can see stars being born, right? These are things that we know that we can see because we have seen them before, right? And this telescope is going to enable us to get a clearer picture of those, probably see more of those types of events, and see even further away than we ever have before. And yes, further away does correlate to seeing further back in time. That's not an assumption. That is based on observations. That's observational science. So there's not evolutionary or naturalistic assumptions. This is just what we know. This is when we look out at the sky. This is what we see. The further away something is, actually, the further away it is, the younger it appears in general. So the further into the universe we look, the younger the universe looks. That's because if something is, say, 10 billion light years away, that means the light from that thing took 10 billion years to get to us. So we're seeing that thing as it was 10 billion years ago, which is really cool. Okay. That's really cool. So the author seems to have a problem with this statement from NASA. By the way, a fun thing about being very pregnant is that when baby shifts her body, she presses into different organs. So like suddenly my stomach will be smaller. So excuse me if I'm kind of like burping a little bit. It's the baby's fault. I can't do anything about it. She's changing the size of my stomach. Pregnancy is weird, y'all. Okay. The prime contractor that developed the spacecraft, Northrop Grumman, stated, by expanding our knowledge of the cosmos, the James Webb Space Telescope will play an important role in our quest to answer compelling questions, such as how did the universe begin, or when were the first stars and galaxies created, or how do planets form, and how do we fit into the cosmos? Yeah, so this is really great, and especially when you're doing like press release stuff, if you want to talk about how your science is going to relate to everyday people, this is a really great way to phrase some of that science mission of this: how do we fit into the cosmos? That's a great like headline for an article for a news article, right? You're not going to have a CA scientific journal paper titled "How do we fit into the cosmos," right? But this is kind of that like broader impact, the way you get people excited about what you're doing. Yeah, so these are really cool questions that the telescope is going to help scientists like address. We're going to be able to study some of the oldest stars, right? And I find that really exciting, right? We want to understand the mechanics of the early universe. Oh my goodness, so cool, right? And we're not, again, contrary to younger creationist arguments, this is we're just observing. That's all a telescope does. It observes things, right? So this is their good science. This is their observational science. We're pointing a telescope and looking really far away, right, and seeing old things, which is super cool. And here's the thing: like looking at the heaven, like looking at the stars, or if we're going to switch to like more of a kind of like a faith-based perspective, right? Say like looking up to the heavens and seeing like the glory of God's creation. If you look at you can very much look at pictures from the James Webb Telescope and be in awe of like God, but that can be your response, and there's nothing like wrong with that. That's not going to be everybody's response, but like you can see this as, isn't God's creation beautiful, right? There's nothing wrong with that, and again, from that like creationist perspective, all scientists are doing is not like nobody is trying to disprove the existence of God. That is no scientist's goal. Also, science can't do that, right? Because science deals with natural things, natural, repeatable processes, predictable processes, and a deity of any kind is inherently beyond that, right? So anyway, um, no scientist's goal is to disprove the existence of God or be a jerk to religious people. Again, most scientists practice a faith of one or another. Um, and plenty of scientists would look at those images and be like, you could call that a spiritual experience, right? Um, uh, but so from that perspective, from like a faith-based perspective, right? it- all they're doing is understanding like how God did stuff, right? Not trying to disprove God in any way. So this is again, there's no reason you can't reconcile being a person of faith and uh, the universe is really old. There's no reason those two things can't be. It's very easy to reconcile those things. Okay, so forgive me for waxing poetically. Note, these observations fall into the category of science that's called historical science, called that only by young earth creationists. Um, blah, making assumptions about the past based on evidence in the present. So, no, that's not what this is doing at all, right? That is because the speed of light is a universal constant. Um, I'm sorry, the roofers are like right over my head. I hope you guys can't hear them. Um, we're not looking at stars and galaxies as they are now. We are seeing them as they were uh, a long time ago. So if something is, so here's a great thing, right? Let's imagine just for a second that you have like a perfect teleporter and a perfect telescope that you can carry in your pocket, right? If we were to uh, instantly transport you 100 light years away from Earth, right? We could just snap our fingers and move you 100 light years away. And you looked back at Earth with your telescope, you would see Earth as it was in 1922. I hope that makes sense because you're 100 light years away. So the light that you are seeing took 100 years to get to you. So you're seeing Earth not as it is in the present, but as it was when that light left Earth. So you'd be seeing Earth as it was in 1922. If we jumped you back, if we teleported you, say, 30,000 light years away, you could see like early human civilization. I think that's around the time of the agricultural revolution, right? You could watch that. So like the speed of light being a universal constant is a weird thing, but what it lets you do is we see into the past and travel into the future. Um, right? I can't travel to the past, but again, in theory, if I could like instantly teleport somewhere, I could see the Earth as it was in different periods of time. So now let's flip that around. We're trapped on Earth, but we're looking out to the universe, right? So we're seeing the universe not as it is, but as it was based off of the distances that these distant objects are, the stars and the galaxies. So if I want to know what the early universe looked like, I have to look really far away. And then the light that I am getting now is as old as the universe if I look 14 billion light years away, right? So I can see the universe as it was when it started, which is really cool. Um, so we're not making assumptions about the past based on evidence in the present. We are, in fact, observing the past. Okay. Um, so he's going to say historical science can be useful in certain applications, like in forensic science, but only when used through a biblical lens. I like that this is italicized and this is in quotes. A biblical lens and logical worldview. Like I said, sorry, there's grammar mistakes in here that are driving me nuts, but I'm trying to not address them. But that formatting is delightful. Okay, so I would need to. So again, I don't like this idea of like this biblical lens because that's what builds assumptions, right? The thing about science is you want to start with as few assumptions as possible. If you have to start with a biblical lens, you're starting with more assumptions than you need. So if the universe was 6,000 years old, I would expect it to look 6,000 years old, but it doesn't. Okay. Okay, however, in this instance, these statements from the telescope are clearly secular and unbiblical, which inevitably means they're also, is it facetious? Or, oh no, that's a made up word. He's trying to be clever. Fallacetious, as in a result of the fall of man. Um, but notice that these are the statement of the goal, a statement of a goal can't be facetious, can it? Or like a statement of a goal can't be wrong. Like my goal is this, and then you come up and say nuh-uh, and I'm like, but it's my goal. Like it can be whatever I want. That's nonsense. Okay. Um, okay. Notice the claim of looking back in time when looking at objects deep in space in order to see how everything in the universe began through cosmological evolution. Just a note, team, cosmological evolution, that is not a proper term. Evolution only refers to biological evolution, what a creationist would call biological evolution. So I don't like that they're using this type of language here. That's actually, this is a form of information control out of like the culty bite model. Because if they're going to control your vocabulary, if we're not going to use the right words, excuse me, if you then try to look up and get a balanced view, right, and do some research on your own about cosmological evolution, you'll only get young Earth creationist sources because no one else uses this term. Anyway, uh, we would really just say origins of the universe. Um, and then also, like, there's different parts of that, right? Like, we want to know how galaxies form. That would just be galaxy formation, things like that. Okay. But note, when making this claim, they've merely assumed cosmological evolution in order to prove cosmological evolution. So no, they're saying that we assume cosmological evolution by assuming star-planet formation occurred in the early stages of galaxies. Okay, so that's not an assumption. Yeah, this isn't an assumption. This is okay. We like point our telescope at things, and the James Webb telescope is not our first telescope, right? We point our telescope at things. You can measure how far away they are. We know what the speed of light is. So then we know how old they are. And it turns out, like when we have consistently, right, when we look at young galaxies, well, that's actually, does a galaxy need to be young for stars to form? I don't think so. I mean, like, presumably more stars and planets would be forming the younger a galaxy is, and that would like drop off with time. But there should be stars forming in our galaxy like right now. Um, so this is so this there's no assumption of old age. Our like understanding that the universe is old comes from, frankly, centuries of observations. And so in those statements, are they making the assumption that the universe is old? Yeah, but that's like, we don't need to restate that every time, right? We don't need to restate, like, deciding that we need to reprove that or redemonstrate that would be like having to redefine gravity every time you write a paper, right? This isn't, if something is kind of settled, right, you don't have to continuously address it. So were those statements that we're making in those like press releases assuming the universe is old? Sure. The science isn't necessarily assuming the universe is old. It is building off the preponderance of evidence that supports an old universe, which is very different than assuming it. And I assure you, if someone found evidence that like the age of the universe was way different than what we thought it was, that would be headlines everywhere, right? That would be a really exciting discovery. And that wouldn't be like suppressed because scientists, we don't want to be wrong, right? We don't want to be wrong about how the universe functions. We want to be right. And so if credible evidence comes out that it's young, right, people would be all over that. It's like, oh, that's really interesting, right? But that evidence has to be credible. Okay, so he's trying to say that there's a logical fallacy in here that there just isn't. All right. Also, my guy, what is this author's name? Rob Webb. Stop using parentheses in your writing, please, good sir. Please stop. It's very obnoxious. Okay, so what is the biblical response? So how should we, especially as Christians, respond to these claims? Be like, universe is cool. That's how you should respond. Aside from the arbitrary, circular reasoning nature of these statements, arbitrary and circular reasoning are synonyms, my guy. And no, there's not a logical fallacy built into it. I'm sorry to burst your bubble. Okay. These goals are obviously antithetical to the biblical worldview. This is to individuals who take the Bible in English as every part of it must literally be true, which again, most Christians don't take that point of view, right? it's a pretty extremist point of view, to be honest. Okay. Rather than relying on this word he made up, assumptions about the past. Right, I'm not stupid. This is a word he made up, because that's not how you spell facetious. What is fallacious? Fallacious. Goodness. I'm so sorry. I am stupid. That's fallacious. Oh, goodness. I might have to cut out a thing in here earlier. Okay. Rather than relying on what he's going to call fallacious assumptions. Again, why did you put that in parentheses? That makes no sense. About the past, it's always better to start with an eyewitness account, i.e., someone who was actually there. Absolutely not. No. That is a terrible place to start. And for this, we need to go to the very first chapter of the Bible. That is a bad place to start for science. Maybe, right, that's a very bad place to start, because it's unreliable, frankly, quite frankly, it's very unreliable. So, like, for my science, where I study climate and weather up in the Arctic, I have never once relied on eyewitness accounts. The closest would be I rely on data taken by people there, or like on ships, right? I've definitely used that. But how a person, say, on a boat, taking samples of sampling the atmosphere, how that person would describe the event is not helpful to me. It's anecdotal evidence. So here's another example. There's a great citizen scientist program through the National Weather Service. So if this relates to why my roof is being replaced, hailstorms. I can't believe I thought that word was made up. That's fallacious. Goodness gracious. Okay. Hailstorms. Sorry. So if you find yourself in a hailstorm, if you find hail, right, when it is safe, it's great if you go out to your backyard, get like an average size piece of hail, or even the biggest piece of hail you can find, and put a like measuring tape or a ruler, some way to show its size, next to it. Snap a picture and tweet it at the National Weather Service station near you, because they will use that data. Because by the time like a researcher can come out and do a survey, all the hail will have melted. So if they want to get confirmation for, hey, what was the largest hail this storm produced? Where was the largest hail? Where did it produce only a little bit of hail? And things like that is really useful. And so, but if what you tweeted to your local National Weather Service office was the words, hey, there's a 2-inch piece of hail in my backyard, then they can't use that data, right? They can't use that because it's kind of a pictures or it didn't happen kind of thing. We need supporting evidence. So eyewitness accounts are shaky at best. That's like the worst evidence you can have in science. Goodness. Okay. You got to have receipts in science. It's a thing. Okay. Anyway, so now we're going to do a Bible study. In Genesis, we plainly read that God created everything in the heavens and the earth within 6 literal days. I would argue that's not the plain reading of the text. Approximately 6,000 years ago, per the biblical timeline, all for his glory. Oh, my guy, you didn't capital his. Who edited this? And he created the sun, moon, and all the stars and every galaxy and corner of the universe on day 4 of creation week. And if that were true, then that would be what we observe when we look out to the universe, right? Pointing a telescope out at the universe and seeing not evidence of this doesn't mean like that we were assuming, or NASA is assuming anything about an old universe. It's just that evidence from telescopes, right? Evidence from hundreds of years of looking out to the stars doesn't support this, right? Doesn't support this claim. So if you need to believe this, if your faith requires you to believe this, then you need to find a way to reconcile in your own mind, right? If the 6,000 year story is true, and it is also true that scientific evidence doesn't support that, right? That these two things are incongruent, but you need the young Earth creation story to be true. That's something you have to reconcile as a matter of faith. But the science can't just change, right? The pictures from space won't change. And that's literally what this is. This isn't like some big hard concept, right? This is listen, building the telescope, huge feat of engineering, but fundamentally what it's doing is it's taking pictures, right? So the pictures that we're seeing don't match this story. You're going to have to reconcile that in your own like mind and within your own faith. But the pictures aren't lying, right? They can't. They're just a picture. Okay, so we're not going to read quotes from the Bible. And like many great Christian astronomers in the past have stated, such as Johannes Kepler. Yeah, Kepler was a great scientist. We have like Kepler's laws. He has laws named after him. Do you know how hard it is to get laws named after you? We should study the heavens, but it needs to be with the goal of admiring the handiwork and glory of God and giving thanks to Him. So you don't capitalize things. It's upsetting. For creating and sustaining our universe. Okay. No, so this is science with an agenda, right? So this is assuming the end, right? Assuming the result before the evidence. So this sentence here is describing bad methodology for science. Now, if you were like just an amateur, if you've got a telescope, like I had a telescope as a kid, I didn't know what I was doing, but I would just take it out and point it at the moon and pretend I was Galileo, and it was great, right? Do that. Oh my gosh, the first time I saw Saturn's rings from a telescope, that was like a true spiritual experience, right? Like I almost wept. That's great. And if you want to admire the handiwork and glory of God with your telescope, that's amazing. Do that, right? And I bet there are some scientists who view part of their job as like, yeah, like I'm studying the universe, I'm studying God's creation. Because again, the majority of scientists are people of faith. Okay. So these two things, this idea of admiring the handiwork and glory of God, is not incongruent with also doing good science, right? Anyhow, okay. So for this mission, the space telescope will not actually. So if you're gonna italicize something, it should have been actually. Will not actually be looking back in time. Rather, it will be examining distant galaxies, which indeed are very far away in space, that have been in existence from the beginning of creations for thousands, not billions of years. Cool. So you're going to have to give me an argument here of basically why distance and time aren't related, right? Because from special relativity, we know those two things are deeply intertwined. Okay. These observations from the telescope will not show us how or when these heavenly objects were formed. Why won't it show us how? If we can point our telescope at stellar nurseries and see stars being born, right? You're going to have to explain to me why that's not watching a star being born. Okay. These observations, okay, rather what they look like by directly imaging Jupiter-sized planets orbiting nearby stars and analyzing the molecular composition of atmospheres on extrasolar planets. What they look like. Sorry, that's like, yeah, directly imaging. Hot Jupiters are a cool type of exoplanet that are pretty easy to find, which would be this Jupiter-sized stars, and then analyzing. Yeah, absolutely, we want to analyze the molecular composition of the atmospheres on extrasolar planets if we want to do that. Exoplanets is a huge part of the research goals of the James Webb Telescope. But it will also show us the early universe because of that interconnection between space and time. Okay. So this is also a badly crafted sentence. My goodness. But note, the biblical stance should not be confused with some form of theistic evolution, which is currently being propagated by some in the program, attempting to mix the Bible with this evolutionary cosmology. I don't know, man. It seems like the much more rational position. Also, understanding the Bible as what it is, and understanding that the creation story in Genesis is a beautiful poem, but it's a poem, right? We don't read the Psalms literally. We read the Psalms as poetry. We should read Genesis 1 literally. We should read it as poetry. Anyhow, and listen, if you want to know more about that, go check out Digital Hammurabi. They know things about that. I don't. I know things about very specific aspects of science. Anyway. Sadly, many in this particular camp, sometimes ignorantly, have actually compromised scripture by accepting the secular ideas being pushed by the James Webb Space Telescope media at NASA, i.e., the ideas being Big Bang and evolution. The James Webb Telescope has nothing to do with evolution. Evolution is a biological process. This is looking at stars. Thus, rejecting the plain biblical reading of Genesis 1 and instead reinterpreting the days of creation as long ages, or reading it as what it is, which is, This is an unbiblical way of thinking that essentially elevates man's fallible ideas as the ultimate standard, i.e., humanism, over the infallible word of God. This whole thing reads like magnetic poetry, right? Like, he's using a lot of words to not say much. I don't have a lot of patience for it. Okay, but let's read this section. The mission shows the foolishness of atheism. On the other hand, the atheistic secularists advocating for purely naturalistic objectives have actually suppressed this biblical truth, which we know scientists today are suppressing biblical truth because of this verse in Romans. So that's cool. Let's read that verse in Romans. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to him. Cool. What does that have to do with stars? Nothing. That's the danger when you just like pull scriptures out of context. You can kind of make them say anything you want. Anyway, and altogether rejected God as the ultimate authority. Instead of submitting to God, they have turned to the religion of materialistic atheism and secular humanism. Secular humanism is like, we should act in a way that is most beneficial to the most people, right? Or minimizes harm, you know? So I don't know what that secular humanism has to do with stars and galaxies. And also, listen to this, advocating for purely naturalistic objectives. So what non-naturalistic objective would you like a telescope to have, right? Like, what would you like it to try to take a picture of that isn't in nature? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's okay. Turn to religion of materialistic atheism. That's the religion of atheism. To answer the fundamental questions posed by the Space Telescope program. How did the universe begin? Well, so here's the thing, my guy. If I ask the question, how does the universe begin? And your answer is God did it. That's not a scientific answer. That's a really unsatisfactory answer. Because I would immediately follow that up with, well, how did God do it? Right? And then if you just want to say miracle, then like, cool, but that doesn't help us understand the universe, right? That's really not a satisfactory answer. And that's also not a scientific answer. And I've said this before, but like, if I can replace your theology with like Gandalf did it, or Rincewind did it, a wizard did it, right? Harry Potter did it. Then I don't think that's a very good theology, but those would be the same answers. How did the universe begin? A wizard did it. How did the universe begin? God did it. Well, how? Magic. How? A miracle. It's the same thing. That's not satisfactory. That doesn't answer the question. It's very thought stopping and rejects curiosity. Okay. Oh, but great. In the irrational worldview, the universe is simply matter in motion that's just bobbing around in a chaotic universe where everything only happens by chance processes. No, these aren't random. Like fundamental forces aren't random processes, right? There are random processes that occur in the universe, Brownian motion, things like that. But like forces acting on things, it's not a random process. Consequently, the worldview makes essential concepts required for science, like the order and uniformity in nature, i.e., future being like the past, and even rationality, utterly impossible. No, no, no. There is, so one, if things are behaving in a probabilistic manner, that would be a random manner, right? They're following a probabilistic curve. So we can still talk a lot about their expected behavior. And then other things are just really, really complicated, right? Like, oh, did you see in the first picture? Did you see that one galaxy that's like being sheared and slugified? That's really cool. How and why is that happening? I think it's gravitational lensing, but like, that's really cool. That would be really hard to model to reproduce that in a computer model. But like, we probably could if we tried really hard, and it would probably help us understand gravity even better. Understand gravity even better. There we go. That full sentence. And like the order and uniformity in nature. So I don't know what he means by uniformity in nature. Nature does weird things all the time, really weird things all the time. But this idea of the future being like the past, I'm not sure I agree with that statement. I would say that there are like laws of nature, like fundamental forces. We have no reason to believe that like the fundamental forces have changed over time. Why would gravity behave differently tomorrow than it did today? Or why would it have behaved differently 1,000 years ago than it does today? Same thing like electromagnetism, the nuclear strong and weak forces, that kind of stuff. There's no reason to believe that universal constants have changed, such as decay constants and I don't know, Planck length, right? So there are certain things that we're like, guess this is a constant because it's always the same no matter how many times we measure it. Speed of light, things like this. Um, uh, so like in that sense, yeah, like the future is like the past. We have no reason to believe that these things have changed over time. But I don't see why this worldview makes like those concepts impossible. I don't see that. Because this like if something is happening by a truly random process, again, it's going to behave like a Gaussian. So we understand a lot about how random processes work. There's whole fields of like statistical mechanics. So it's not random doesn't mean unpredictable. Incredibly complicated doesn't mean unpredictable. It might be incredibly difficult to predict or model or understand. But like anyway, nonetheless, many of the very smart atheists, again, majority of scientists practice faith, working on the telescope, obviously still used scientific principles to develop and launch this amazing telescope into space, and were quite good at it. So in reality, they had to be inconsistent with their own worldview and borrow these principles from the biblical worldview, including rationality and logic, thus exposing the complete foolishness of the atheistic worldview. So, like citation needed, my guy. I don't know what you mean by this. So like when they're doing this type of science or this type of engineering, then it's good and fine. But when they're doing this science over here, even though their methodology hasn't changed, you're like, no, but now that's illogical. I don't know where the line is there for you, my guy. And I also don't know, like, if I was going to formally study logic, right, which is a whole field, it's in that weird liminal space between math and philosophy. But I was going to go formally study logic, the Bible would not be my textbook, right? I would use a logic textbook. So I don't know how like logic in the formal sense is innately a part of a biblical worldview. And I also like something can be true, right? Like if A then B, if B then C, therefore if A then C, right? That is true regardless of how old I think the universe is, right? So this idea that like worldview matters is very confusing to me, and I do not get it. Okay. On the flip side, God's logic is built into the universe, which is why the universe operates in a consistent fashion by obeying natural laws, i.e., the way God upholds the universe, and is not simply random or chaotic. Well, there are often random processes and chaotic processes. Chaos means something very specific in a mathematical sense, not just like it doesn't mean chaos as you and I refer to it in English. It's a system that is highly dependent upon initial conditions. Is the mathematical like. Defining a chaotic system is actually really hard, but you kind of know when you see one. Okay. In addition, God has given us reliable senses to discover and understand our universe. This is what makes the telescope mission a possible and intriguing scientific reality. I think this is kind of the like clockwork universe sort of argument. I don't, right? There has to be logic built into the universe, which is why it operates at a consistent fashion, therefore God. But see, this is actually contrary to a lot of young earth creationist arguments, which is, well, how do you know the speed of light wasn't different in the past? Because we have no evidence to support that it was. Well, how do you know that the universe didn't behave by completely different rules 6,000 years ago? You know, because it would need to in order for young earth creationism to work, right? Okay. So this is, he's using a lot of words here to not say much. There's no doubt that this accomplishment of successfully building, launching the telescope is an amazing feat of work. Okay. Goodness, we jumped down to like preaching about Jesus down here. Oh no, and now we're going to do an altar call through a blog post. Cool. All right, we can be done. Rocket science confirms biblical creation. We might have to read that one eventually. Okay, we're done with that article. We're done here. You guys are super cool. So if I see more young earth creationism hot takes on the James Webb telescope, I'll let y'all know. Oh, do you see my plant light behind me? Her name is Martha. She's an Asian pitcher plant, and I need to feed her. We also just had exterminator come and spray outside, so it might be hard for me to find a couple flies to feed her. Her pitchers are little. Anyway, oh my gosh. Um, Scatterbrained. Sorry, it's legitimately hard to focus when I read some of those younger creationism articles because they're so like bad, and it's like this isn't how science works. Why? And then therefore this is not worth my time. That's kind of how I approach a lot of things. But it is entertaining to review them. Anywho, if you guys stuck out this long, thank you so much for sticking it out. I'm sorry if you can hear lots and lots of hammering on my roof going on. And yeah, I think actually we're going to stick on this kick of like deep space that I've been on for a little bit. I think the next video I'm going to film is going to be on, we're going to go Jason Lyle's hot takes on distant starlight. I found a video from him. So I did a whole video talking about like why the one-way speed of light, even if it's instantaneous, it doesn't matter, because all of these other things are still true. And so now we're going to take a look at like Jason Lyle's hot takes on distant starlight, because I have a feeling that's going to come up with the James Webb Telescope. Like I'm surprised that this article didn't try to address that. Anyway, you guys are cool. I hope you're having a great day. I hope you're well. And I will see you soon. Okay, bye team.